Good afternoon. We'll now call the meeting of the Waco City Council, May 5th, 2020 to order at 3 p.m. Joining me online today are Mayor Pro Tem Andrea Bearfield, Councilmember Hector Savito, Councilmember John Kennard, Councilmember Dylan Meek, and Councilmember Jim Holmes. Please join us now for a moment of silence. Thank you. On March 16, 2020, the governor suspended various provisions of the Open Meetings Act pursuant to his state of disaster authority. The change was effective March 16, 2020 until further notice or until the state disaster declaration expires. In accordance with distancing guidelines and while providing as much transparency as possible, this Waco City Council meeting will not be open to the public. This meeting is being broadcast live at WCC.TV. The audio is also being recorded and video and audio recordings will be available to the public. According to the governor and attorney general, statutes that may require face-to-face interaction between members of the public and public officials are suspended, provided, however, that the governmental body offers alternative methods of communicating with their public officials. This includes public comment on agenda items. In an effort to allow for as much public input as possible, those who wish to submit their written comments on a listed agenda item were asked to submit their comments to the city secretary by 11:30 a.m. today. The city secretary will read into the record the comments submitted by then at the appropriate time. Individuals who registered to speak on a public hearing will be allowed to speak via conference phone for 3 minutes. We will now recess the regular session and convene to work session with a report from Bradley Ford, our Deputy City Manager.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. We have no changes to the agenda today. I did want to take, though, an opportunity to acknowledge and do an employee recognition item. During the COVID-19 pandemic response, some of our departments have seen their work significantly slow down, like at the Cameron Park Zoo, while others have seen it almost cease entirely, like at the Convention Center. All the while, we have a certain set of departments that have really been in the thick of COVID-19 response and have been at peak workload for almost 2 months now. And one of the quiet but significant stories of this COVID-19 is that we've realigned our team to ensure we've got the right people and skills in the right places to serve the citizens of Waco. So the city manager and I wanted to acknowledge our many employees who, frankly, without complaint, changed their job functions, their work locations, their shifts, or their days off to keep the city running. These employees have made significant contributions in areas like our dispatch center, emergency operations, public health, as well as on our small business recovery program. And later on, once it's more appropriate in time, the city manager's office will acknowledge employees specifically that have gone above and beyond expectations during this pandemic. With that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Larry for the Halsey report.
All right, thank you, Deputy City Manager Bradley Ford. Turn your attention to your monitors and take a look at what's going on here. The Texas Ranger Hall of Fame and Museum continues to come up with creative ways to engage interested persons in the things behind the closed doors due to the COVID-19 event. One of the latest things they've been added is the guess the artifact. Guess the artifact. It's hyphenated right there in the wrong place. Guess the artifact. A really up close look at a part of the unique item at the museum's collection. When you think you've guessed the item or you just give up, you can click on the answer and the object is revealed along with the information and history of the product. Just another fun way the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame and Museum enthusiasts can engage with the amazing collection of the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame. The popularity of the new game sparked the interest of both the Syntex Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Arts Center of Waco. They both help partner with the museum to present educational videos that can be viewed on museum's Facebook page. Due to the early printing deadline for the City Limits monthly newsletter that's mailed to the citizens with their water bills, some of the information printed about events and activities may not be reflective of the COVID-19 virus dating orders issued by the mayor and the governor. As with printed materials, sometimes the minute the ink is dry, the information changes and events are canceled. So we encourage citizens to check the city's website for up-to-date information on any event or activity that they may read about in the city limits that comes with the water bills. During the last meeting, I reported how the parks crews have been helping at the animal shelter with bedding and other efforts to make the four-legged residents happy that live there. They also have been doing some beautification projects, such as replacing crushed granite with some stable landscaping rock. Just another collaborative effort of both the departments during the COVID-19 pandemic to help make the animals' temporary home clean and active. The library's curbside checkout has been a huge success since they were required to close. Over 3,100 books have been checked out each week from all 4 locations that offer the program. Patrons with a library card can select the books that they want, that they are liking, and from the online catalog, and have them transferred to the location nearest them and schedule them for pickup. Back in December, the City Council awarded a $10.2 million construction contract to Archer Western to install new high-service pumps, electrical systems, and controls that will replace an older pump station and increase the Riverside Water Treatment Plant's capacity from 50 to 60 million gallons a day. In addition to providing the system's growth and redundancy, this new pump station will better utilize the new Riverside to Golson 30-inch water line that was recently constructed, and will provide water service to the new airport pump station, as well as feed the new Hillcrest pump station. When the word got out about the Small Business Emergency Recovery Fund that the council and county commissioners made available on Tuesday, April the 28th, over 60 applications were submitted within the first 5 minutes after the application was posted. As of this morning, 606 applications have been received. The selection committee did begin meeting April 30th to start reviewing the applications. Serving on the committee, in addition to Galen Price, who is the director of the Housing and Community and Code Enforcement Division, is Rainey Shaw, Hudnall of the Housing Department, Anita Mays with the Legal Department, Callie Mendoza with Parks, Magali Aurora, Planning Inspections, Kelsey Montgomery from Housing and Code, Susan Holt, Housing and Code, Priscilla Ard, Human Resources, Allison Oregon at Finance, Anna Ferrara, Animal Services, Amy Wilbanks, the City Manager's Office, Carla Pendergraph from the Convention Center, and Kimberly Worley from Housing and Code. I'd like to also acknowledge that the IT department, the library, the Municipal Information Department, Finance, and Parks also have helped in the process. Coming up on this Thursday, May the 7th at 6 p.m., the Family Health Center will host a virtual town hall meeting where residents can ask questions from members of the health center, Family Health Center, and other local medical providers. The town hall meeting will originate from this location here, the 3rd floor conference room in the Waco City Hall, and will be telecast live on the Waco City Cable Channel and our live stream. And that completes my report.
Thanks, Larry, for that informative report. Today, Council, we do have one public hearing on the agenda. It's public hearing 2020-277, which covers the reestablishment of standards of care for the City of Waco youth programs. And Ryan Holt will cover that later in the agenda process. Sorry, we're...
Bradley?
Yes, ma'am.
Before we move on, I do want to add a little texture and information to the information about the town hall. We're really excited about this opportunity to that the Family Health Center has taken with McLennan County, the Commissioner Chisholm Miller, as well as Councilmember Sabito and myself, and the subject and topic of the town hall is the impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. So I think that and as dynamic as this panel will be, it will be translated in as close to real time as possible by the panelists. And so we are encouraging people to tune in to WCCC. The city will be streaming Facebook Live to be able to really put some context to this, because we know that disproportionately the communities of color are affected at a greater value nationwide for communities of color. So we thought that it was imperative that we have that discussion here.
Thanks, Councilmember. We do have also 16 resolutions today on the agenda, and I'm going to take a few moments to highlight a few of those. The first two being two resolutions that approve the acceptance of federal or pass-through funding for our COVID-19 response. Resolution 2020-283 ratifies an interlocal cooperation contract with the Texas Department of State Health Services to the Waco-McLennan County Public Health District for activities related to COVID-19. This contract includes $211,000 for the health district to hire graduate assistants who will help our epidemiological staff with case surveillance, contact tracing related to COVID-19. As the council is well aware, our health district staff and epi team specifically have really been working literally around the clock the last few weeks, and these funds will help them get some much needed assistance. Additionally, the contract includes $216,000 for the purchase of additional personal protective equipment and supplies for our public health staff and first responders. It'll also help support the hiring of contract staff to reach vulnerable populations and support capacity at alternative care sites. So this is quite a contract benefit to our community. Resolution 2020-287, in the same vein of COVID-19, approves the submission of Emergency Supplemental Funding Program, a grant request through the U.S. Department of Justice. We've been notified that City of Waco will receive an allotment of $161,000 through this program. The police department will be able to seek a reimbursement for overtime expenses, as well as personal protective equipment purchases to ensure our first responders have adequate supplies during the COVID-19 response.
Hey, Bradley, I'd like to chime in real quick on both of these resolutions. I just want to say I'm very grateful that we are applying and receiving this amount of money, especially when it comes to COVID-19. Specifically to 283, I really would just like to make note that this money will go to education and data research, which is very important for our community, for our council members. And so I think that's we will be able to more or less have a better handle on the data that we're providing our constituency, our community members, and our city as a whole. And so I'm very excited to see this coming forward. 287, also excited about this, specifically for COVID-19. But when it comes to the equipment, the training and supplies that our police officers are needing and are looking for, I just think that this is should be celebrated, that we are receiving something of this magnitude that is so essential and needed for such a time as this. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you for acknowledging those.
Thanks, Councilmember. Resolution 2020-286 is another one I wanted to highlight. It formalizes an agreement to allow the Waco Police Department to assist the McLennan County Sheriff's Office in the permitting, inspection, and enforcement of the newly adopted McLennan County Game Room regulations. This agreement represents 18 months, really, of effort by the county and the city working together on a critical issue in our region.
I'd like to comment on that really quick, Bradley. I just appreciate our local law enforcement agencies, both the county and at the city. Illegal gambling is a problem, specifically in low-income communities, because it's a predatory crime. I believe that it damages financial security, injures financial stability in the households in many of our communities. So I'm grateful that we have a little more freedom, and it'll be easier for us to enforce illegal gambling that's happening in so many different areas of our community. So I appreciate the efforts of city staff and the county, and I look forward to seeing the outcomes that I believe will be positive for our neighborhoods.
Thanks, Councilmember. Resolution 2020-289 awards a contract to TTG Utilities for improvements to 5th Street from Bosque Boulevard to Interstate 35 in an amount not to exceed $9.1 million. Wanted to highlight this one. The bids came in within 3% of the engineer's original estimate for this highly visible project, which will replace more than 1.2 miles of street surface and also thousands of feet of water and sewer infrastructure. This project is being presented today with the 3 bid alternatives since we got such competitive pricing. Staff anticipates the project will start in June 2020 with a completion date anticipated around spring of 2022. The last resolution I'm going to highlight today is 2020-291, which amends the city's contract with CPNY to design system modifications to enable Leroy Tours Gerald Water Supply Corporation to access our water supply at the pump station, and provides the city with contract administration and inspection services during the construction phase. This amendment is part of our North I-35 Water Improvements Program. It's under design, and that's consistent with the regional water plan, wherein the city of Waco provides water to the region in order to address challenges that are present due to groundwater, arsenic levels in groundwater. On the agenda today, we do have one ordinance. It is on first reading. It's ordinance 2020-294, which would reappoint Christopher Taylor as judge of the municipal court of the city of Waco for a term of 2 years, beginning June 1st, 2020, and expiring May 31st, 2022. If there's no questions further, that concludes my report.
Any other questions or comments from council members?
No, I did want to, I don't know, I think we might have missed something in the Halsey report. I did want to take time to acknowledge our Convention and Visitors Bureau as we celebrate nationally. It's National Travel and Tourism Week. And Waco CVB has done some amazing stuff on their social media to promote this National Travel and Tourism Week. I know it's hard. That's an industry that's been struck really hard due to COVID-19. And we did want to acknowledge the hard work and dedicated staff that have been willing to move around and be nimble in doing the things that the city needed them to do if they weren't able to function within the convention center, for example, or at the zoo, as mentioned earlier. But we did want to highlight that the national theme is the spirit of travel, and the hashtag is Waco Awaits, because we are looking forward to when it is safe for people to come back and visit the amazing assets that we have within our community. So I didn't want to get too deep in the meeting without saying that.
Thank you, Councilmember.
All right. If there are no other comments or questions, are there any items council would like to remove from the consent agenda? Seeing none, the consent agenda will include resolutions 2020-278 through 2020-293, unless a commented card is received on a consent agenda item. And I will turn it back to Bradley to introduce the next work session presentation.
All right. Thanks, Mayor. First up, we have a discussion of activities and updates from the COVID-19 community work teams. And I believe Councilmember Meek will be leading this discussion today.
Mayor, I'm sorry. This is Esmeralda. Mayor, before we begin, do you want to read those work session item or the comments that we received at the beginning of the work session?
Let's read those after we introduce the next item, Esmeralda.
Okay, perfect.
Good afternoon. I will just briefly introduce my colleagues who are co-chairing each of the working groups. We've discussed these a couple of times now. We're going to take this week just to give a brief update on some of the work the working groups have done since we last convened. As a reminder, after the effects of COVID began to be realized, the mayor created 4 working groups in our community. One for business and individual financial recovery, one for healthcare, one for social services and education, and one for communication. And we have a different council person and a community member co-chairing each of those groups. And it has been such a joy to see our community at large have a proactive response to the challenges that COVID has created. So with that, because Jim is not muted, we'll start with him. And Jim, why don't you give us an update on the business and individual recovery since we last met?
Thanks, Council Member Meek. I appreciate it. The only reason I'm not muted is because I want to make sure I don't cut myself off in the middle of this deal. So I very carefully do it about 5 minutes early. So anyway, I just want to start out by, again, I'm a business and individual recovery task force that the mayor asked us to put together. And it seems like when I've talked in the past about this, I've kind of I mentioned briefly, but just the makeup of our committee is amazing. I want to make sure I give those guys all the credit here. Our co-chair is Sarah Roberts with KSR Consulting, just brilliant in organizing these meetings. We meet twice a week, and very full agendas and very informative agendas. John Bible with the Centex African American Chamber of Commerce, a brilliant young guy in helping us through this crisis. Alfred Solano, everybody knows Alfred with the Centex Hispanic Chamber. Again, just very collaborative guy. With the Greater Waco Chamber of Commerce, we have Matt Metters and Chris Collins. And again, the research they do at that group is very impressive and very conducive to getting some of these projects tackled. And John Passavant with Startup Waco is also helping us out there, and just a rookie of the year guy. I know he's kind of new in town, but he's catching on and helping us out in this task. Since the last meeting, really, we were kind of overtaken by events. The Paycheck Protection Program that we all tried to get out into the community. Again, that was the $2 trillion federal program that was going to small businesses. The chamber heads were all helping get that word out. We actually went through stage 2 yesterday of that funding, another $250 billion of funding on top of the original $350. So we got more folks into more small businesses in Waco into that opportunity for loans and really grants. They end up being grants. And now we're kind of talking about and that we're still going in that stage 2 of PPP, a Paycheck Protection Program. Yeah, I think McLennan County and Waco and Greater Waco has done a tremendous job of getting this program into the hands of the small businesses here in Waco. The local banks have done a great job, and the chambers. Now we're actually working on the forgiveness aspects of that, because after 8 weeks of the original loan or award, you have the opportunity for the forgiveness of the entire amount, potentially and hopefully. So we're starting to get that into the hands of small businesses, and the reach that we're getting from John and Alfred and Matt and John Passavant are great. The recovery stages, as the governor put out there recently, going from 25%, hopefully again in a couple weeks, up to 50%, helping the businesses understand that and getting that word out and trying to understand the challenges around that. We're spending some time with that initiative. And then the last thing I'll talk about today, Dylan, is the Small Business Emergency Recovery Fund that thanks to the Waco Industrial Foundation, thanks to the Commissioner's Court, and thanks to my fellow councilmen here, Andrea, John, Hector, and Mayor, and you, Dylan, we got this thing stood up and rolled out in I think record time, going from concept to implementation to planned implementation has been tremendous. As Larry said a little bit ago, we've got 600 applications in the queue that will more than take up the 850,000 that we put into the program. And again, this isn't a cure-all deal, but we're trying to reach out to the folks that did get closed down as a non-essential business and weren't able to get access to the Paycheck Protection program. So anyway, hopefully this is going to work out. I think the chamber heads are also, the guys that I talked about are also, some of them are on the advisory deal there too. So I think we've set up a nice framework, a good process. And again, we did this in a matter of literally days. And again, I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that. And hopefully we can get every business in Waco back on the road and get it to the other side of this COVID issue. Dylan, that's some of the highlights that we've got going.
Thank you, Councilmember Holmes. As we've said before, I think this is a business-friendly council, and the work that this working group has done, I think, is evidence of that. So I appreciate your good efforts. Next, I'll turn it over to Councilmember Barefield for Social Services and Education. Take it away.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. It has been my privilege and pleasure to serve with Susie Painter March, the CEO of Prosper Waco, on this Social Services and Education Committee. We have a brief update for you today. We've had a lot of changes federally with our vulnerable population and both federally and at the state level regarding Medicaid and SNAP. And I just wanted to share some of those eligibility changes with you today. Regarding Medicaid, they have suspended Medicaid renewals. They've suspended periodic data checks. They have been keeping all Medicaid recipients continuously enrolled, which is a good thing. Texas has also taken steps to reduce workloads, to streamline enrollment for Medicaid and CHIP, which allows households to self-attest to their income if the normal verification methods like pay stubs or contacted employees are unavailable, as so many businesses have been closed. They've also waived the interview requirements for Medicaid. Regarding SNAP, they've waived the requirement to interview, the suspension of employment training. They've suspended the proof needed for able-bodied limits, so the job seeking hoops don't have to be jumped through in order to get your benefits. They've extended the enrollment for all SNAP households. So if you're enrolled, you are continually enrolled for right now. And the Texas Health and Human Services have also have self-reporting of the income as the federal level did. Also, we have been, Prosper Waco has a new workforce pathways working group, and it's forming to coordinate and support workforce training opportunities, because as we've seen with the numbers of unemployment that continue to rise, those trainings will be necessary. So they are getting in front of and trying to figure out what we can do to support that. The Family Resource Pantry is supplying family needs. They had 81 families on Friday, and with products being delivered. The Family Bridge will continue to support, and we believe that it'll continue to be a big need as the unemployment numbers from March, and these are unemployment for the numbers in Waco was 5% in March. McLennan County filings were 8260, and McLennan County unemployment was 4.5%. So we have been working to make sure that the resources that have been put in place already due to COVID-19 are continually getting everything that they need and replenished. And I know that there are volunteers that are needed. And if you just continue to go and work with WacoWorkingTogether.org/COVID, those are the places that all of those resources, information, and opportunities to volunteer will be listed. And that's all I really have today.
Very good. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Barefield's working group, the scope of her what she was tasked with is quite large, and Councilmember Barefield and Ms. March are certainly up to the task and have done a great job of bringing order to chaos. And in the midst of so many different challenges, and in the midst of so many different people who want to help but don't quite know how, or know that there's resources out there but don't know quite how to get those, I think that they have brought a structure and an organization that has been critical for the good, for us to see the outcomes that we've achieved. So thank you, Councilmember.
I appreciate that. I did forget one little something. With the work with the faith leaders, there is also, in addition to the town hall that we're having Thursday, the faith leaders group has been working with Family Health and the physicians there to really educate themselves on, COVID-19, certainly, and how to continue to spread that information to their congregations as trusted influencers. But they're also working with just a pathway for health information, period, to be shared within their congregations, because we know, those who are believers, they trust their pastors. And so offering another line of information just to extend communication on health and wellness for our communities, a lot of which we would not be served any other way, or may not have just the initial gut response to go to a doctor, to trust a doctor. They trust their pastors. And so if there's some information that they can pass and continue to keep an open line of communication, we think that that'll strengthen overall health and wellness throughout our communities, but especially our vulnerable ones. So I'd like to take a moment to highlight them. Again, the pastors of this city have really stepped up, and we are incredibly appreciative for them and their dedication to their pledge, to their city, to their people. Shout out to Liz Lagawa and all the work that she's done with gathering these folks together. But that was just one of the things that we're really proud of.
Thank you, Councilmember. I will next turn it over to Councilmember Kennard, who is in charge of our health working group, co-chairing that with Dr. Jackson Griggs.
Thank you, Dylan. Yes, Dr. Griggs has done the yeoman's work, and you can hear him much more eloquently and thoroughly explain all this tomorrow at the press conference. The judge and the mayor scheduled at, I believe, 1:30. The work of our group over the past couple weeks, there's actually a group spent considerable time drafting in just draft form a phased plan for reopening that ended up being unnecessary due to the governor's executive order that kind of superseded anything we might want to do locally. But I wanted to acknowledge that in the event that we had been able to retain control over this process, there was significant input, significant thought, and we had a strategy ready to go should we be able to have a say in kind of how all that works. But the governor kind of took control of that, and so we're working on through his edict. Our health providers, again, non-essential medical services are reopening, and we are still encouraging people with chronic conditions to call in to their physician to make sure that they're getting the treatment that they need. Our health providers and our deployers are working towards a shared testing strategy. Our state still, just as a state as a whole, under tests relative to the country, and we still need to be doing more, and we recognize that. But our leaders and health providers and workers are doing, and the public health district and others are doing all that we can to get as many tests here as possible to make sure that we are on top of this. In addition, we are working towards, in partnership with Baylor and others, other ways to collect data to get an idea of kind of where we are community-wide as it relates to this virus and its prevalence within our population. Anything we can get to help us kind of stay ahead of the curve and make sure that we are doing everything we can in a safe and proactive manner to keep our population healthy and keep the spread of the virus to a minimum. The public health district has been doing a lot of wonderful work towards expanding our contact tracing, which is another key aspect towards controlling the virus and its spread as we still begin to open up. We believe the resources and capacity are there. Hopefully they will not be needed, but there's a lot of planning and work going on in that front to make sure that should the need arise and should we see a spike in cases, that the resources and capacity are there to provide adequate contact tracing. And then again, it was already mentioned that Thursday there is the town hall to address the impact of the virus on people of color, and I know our colleagues are going to be on that, Councilmember Savito and Bearfield, and I appreciate y'all's participation in that. And then finally, it's just one of the things that we're the strategic communications group. Hector can probably address this more. The things that we are working on and needing to encourage and be upfront about is just as we reopen, the importance of maintaining physical distance, of not touching your face, of washing your hands, of wearing a mask in public as you're able. Our community has done a very good job to this point, but also just I believe we've been somewhat lucky in kind of not having the low numbers that we've had, and I think that can lead, and our health leaders agree that can lead to a sense of complacency that actually right now, as we continue to open things up and restaurants and malls and whatnot start allowing people in them, that the risk of further spread is higher now, and that continuing those health and safety protocols is absolutely critical to make sure that we continue to mitigate and lower flatten the curve and keep the spread of this virus as low as possible in our community. So again, our health systems, per the governor's order, still have planned capacity to deal with cases of COVID should they arise in our community. I think the numbers were just released right now. I think we have 7 active and 1 hospitalized. So a fairly low tally, particularly as it relates to many of our other communities around the state, which is something we should all be very thankful for, but also maintain vigilance to make sure that we keep it that way.
Thank you, council member. Again, just another set of examples of how our community is working hard to be strategic and proactive. We are not sitting by. We are getting ahead, and I, again, just really thankful for your efforts, council member, and also Dr. Griggs and everyone else who's participated in this proactive work to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we are moving forward in a healthy and positive way. Next, last but not least, Councilmember Speedo and his co-chair, Natalie Kalinsky, have been working hard on the communications team. So I'll turn it over to Councilmember Speedo.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Councilmember Meek. Good afternoon to my fellow council members, city staff. Just want to give a quick update on our strategic communication task force. Since we met last time as a council on the city council meeting, we have experienced the governor's executive orders of opening some of the parts of the economy back up. So that has really positioned our task force to really strategize and change the message that we're getting out. Councilmember Kennard alluded to this, and I appreciate he's been a good sounding board for me this week as I ask him questions and send things his way. But just want to give a little bit of update. So we're still meeting twice a week with our governmental entities. So that includes people from other parts of McLennan County, other cities, City of Lorena, City of Hewitt, Robinson, etc. We're still meeting with the county, Patricia Miller from County Commissioner's Court. We still have our higher ed representatives, TSTC, Baylor, MCC, and of course, some of the larger ISDs that are meeting frequently. And just there's some great dialogue and communication going on. You really could see the synergy taking place amongst the groups. We're still sending out 2 newsletters a week. In fact, earlier today, we sent out our 10th edition. So you should be receiving those, and people can sign up for those newsletters if you want to on covidwaco.com. It says English and Spanish, and we really focus on 3 main areas in those newsletters. It's anything from the health response, business recovery, and social services. And we did that intentionally to cover the other working groups that the mayor put together a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have begun changing the message that we are getting out. So no longer are we promoting social distancing, but we're promoting physical distancing. So when you are out at the supermarket, when you are out doing those essential services, we're still encouraging people to stay at home as much as possible. But if you're going to go out, make sure that you're practicing that physical distancing, at least 6 feet in between you and the other person. We're moving from promoting face masks to face coverings. So we completely understand that face masks there's a shortage right now, and not a lot of people have access to it. So even if it's a bandana or a scarf or something that you could put around to cover your nose and mouth, we definitely encourage that. And then of course, we still are strongly encouraging hand washing constantly throughout the day, hand sanitizers, even as you're exchanging credit cards. If you go to the grocery store and using your debit card to pay, something like that, making sure that you're a hand sanitizer, you carry it in your car and in your office and at home if possible. We're focusing more on the PSAs that are addressing the executive orders of the governor. So as we begin to open up more retail stores and restaurants, you can actually go in and sit down if you want to. The malls are open up, museums are opening up. You can just some basic rules that you can follow while you're out there. And then last and finally, our community calendar is almost done. I mentioned it a little bit in our last council meeting. A community calendar will be for community people, the county, to go, and if they want information on a specific when the executive order went into place for the governor, when phase 2, whenever that is, when will that happen, et cetera, things like that. And people will be able to disseminate that information either by the city that they live in or by the school system that they're looking for. And so we just want to make it as user-friendly as possible. And I just want to thank John Possible and Startup Waco and his staff for just helping us with those efforts. As we begin to wait on the second phase from the governor and what he will encourage to open up, we will begin to strategize those messages as well. And so those are just some of the small things that we've been working on since our last council meeting. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Sabito. I appreciate that. Again, just the strategic and collaborative effort to make sure that our community is made completely aware of all of the work that's being done in their role in the work that's being done is so critical. So thank you for your work. We appreciate you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Well, thank you, Dylan, and thank you all for the amazing work that you continue to do. You continue to astound us with the collaborative work, the proactive approach, and I just know that it's making a huge difference for our city and our community. So thank you for the continued work that you're doing and your co-chairs and all the key partners that you're working with. At this time, I'll turn it over back over to Deputy City Manager Bradley Ford to introduce the next work session item. And then before that presentation begins, I'll ask our City Secretary, Esmeralda Hudson, to read comments that were received from Teresa Porter, as well as comments on 2 items received from Nellen Northcutt. Bradley.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, work session 2020-270 is up next. It's a discussion of the coronavirus disease, COVID-19, including the impact on the community and also implementation of reopening city facilities. We'll hear both from Assistant City Manager Deidre Emerson, as well as Assistant City Manager Paul Kane later in the presentation. Esmeralda.
Yes, sir. The first comment is from Teresa Porter. May is Autism Awareness Month, and this week, 4th through the 8th, May 20, is Air Quality Awareness Week. The EPA, CDC, and other Air Now partners are celebrating this week with the theme of Better Air, Better Health, with the goal of promoting air quality awareness and encouraging people to check the Air Quality Index daily. Please visit airnow.gov/AQAW for a list of topics as well as educational activities and resources available in English and in Spanish for parents, teachers, and students. I said it on Earth Day and I'll say it again. I hope you've had the opportunity to go outside and breathe in the air. It's cleaner than it's been in a while. Have you looked at the TCEQ Air Quality Index lately? The numbers are half of what they were this time last year. Stop and pay attention to how the air tastes and smells right now. This is what it could be like all the time if at least half of the vehicles on the road didn't have a tailpipe. It's time to live in a world that is healthier for all of its citizens. Science proves that people who breathe dirty air have higher rates of respiratory illness, making clear air more important than ever. I have a handout for you today, the April issue of the current events, and that's been forwarded to the council already. I hope you enjoy the entire e-zine, but I'd like to draw your attention to 3 articles in particular. Page 12, Every Day is Earth Day, is an apples-to-apples data analysis of gas versus electric versus hybrid. The article includes lots of graphs. I know a couple of you all like graphs. Page 28, What is PM 2.5 and Why You Should Care, talks about fine atmospheric particulate matter and how it can cause heart attacks, strokes, lung diseases, and birth defects, among other things. Page 37, Harvard School of Public Health crunches data, shows that people with pre-existing conditions caused by air pollution are at a greater risk to die from diseases like COVID-19. For the sake of public health, it's time to welcome EVs in Waco, install public charging stations, and set an example for residents by electrifying the fleet. There are more than a dozen fully electric, medium, and heavy-duty trucks coming to the market in the next 2 years, several already in production. Everything from weed eater to garbage trucks are already available. Yes, in some cases, the price tag for initial purchase is a couple of dollars higher than non-electric, but once you factor in reduced maintenance cost and the increased public health benefit, electric is cheaper. Comments by Alan D. Northcutt on work session 2020 to 70. I would commend the city council for quickly instituting social distancing in Waco that has saved lives. My comment concerns the reopening of city's facilities. As a disc golfer player, I noted that the city disc golf courses are reopening. I observed the city courses do not have any warning signs for other visitors to the parks, especially Cameron Park. Disc golf players and others recreating in the parks often share the same spaces, and often it seems visitors are not aware that the course exists. This increases the risk of visitors being struck by a disc. The discs often fly at a high velocity and hard plastic and can harm those they strike. The ultimate responsibility for safety falls on the player through the discs. However, when visitors are not aware of the courses, yelling "for" or "heads up" does not elicit any reaction. And most courses outside of Waco I visited, DO, have signs like warning, flying discs, etc. Amsler Park in McGregor, for example, has warning signs. For safety reasons, I suggest the city strongly consider placing these inexpensive signs in strategic places in parks and disc golf courses. See attached example. And I will forward that attached example. Flare installations at city landfill. This agenda item describes funding of a methane collection and flare system at the city landfill. Certainly, flaring of natural gas from landfills has a lower greenhouse gas impact than escape of the natural gases into the atmosphere. Flaring of the natural gas produces CO2, which is also a greenhouse gas. In addition, flaring can release other toxic compounds, including formaldehyde, sulfur dioxide, and aromatic hydrocarbons. The agenda item does not discuss any use of the landfill gas other than flaring. Rather than flaring only, the optimal use of the landfill gas would be to transport it and use for electricity production, vehicle fuels, or other industrial uses. I recommend these use of the landfill gas be investigated, rather than only flaring, which produces carbon dioxide with no positive benefit of the gas. Thank you, Alan Northcutt. That's all I have, Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Esmeralda. And before we get into this presentation, I would like to point out that the infrastructure that's being built at the landfill to capture the landfill gases could be used in the future if we feel it's appropriate to sell that gas for some other purpose. So we'll be able to evaluate that at that time. Thank you.
Thanks, Esmeralda and Mayor. As I mentioned, Assistant City Manager Deidre Emerson is going to start us off with a COVID-19 update related to our case statistics. Deidre?
Thank you, Bradley. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Our COVID-19 case update for today is as follows. We have one new positive case, bringing our total positive case count to 92. 7 of those cases are active, of which 1 is hospitalized and in critical condition. 81 cases have recovered, and we have had 4 deaths in our community. There have been a total of 3,208 tests completed as of May 3rd for the entire McLennan County. If you don't have any questions, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Deidre. Mayor and Council, good afternoon. I want to walk you through some of the city operational changes that we're making and trying to keep up with the Open Texas plan as well as Council's order. As you know, staff returned to work yesterday, May the 4th. Most every department had all their employees back, and we do have a phased-in approach to opening some of our facilities. You see, hopefully you see here on the screen. The first phase, which occurred on Monday, was to open Cottonwood Creek, the disc golf courses, tennis courts, and the Texas Ranger Hall of Fame, all of those consistent with both the governor and council's plan. So my understanding, Cottonwood Creek was very busy, and I believe Byron said we had 30 or 35 folks out at the Hall of Fame on Monday. So folks are getting back out. You see in phase 2, which we are looking at May 18th through the 31st and looking at that range of time where we'll consider opening our playgrounds, splash pads, basketball courts, fitness equipment, skate park, a lot of our park facilities, restrooms, outdoor pavilions. We are awaiting word from the National Park Service on the Waco Mammoth National Monument and, of course, Cameron Park Zoo. Those are all park amenities that we plan to look at opening under phase 2. You'll notice that most of these are outdoors where there are smaller groups. Social distancing or personal distancing may be a little more practical in these situations. And it gives us time to get some of those facilities ready for the public use. And then in phase 3, which is June 1st and beyond, we have the park indoor rentals, the practice fields, all of our community centers with the computer labs, meeting rooms, and fitness equipment, senior centers, as well as our athletic leagues around the city would all begin around June 1st. It's my understanding that today the governor made an announcement that salons are going to open on May the 8th, and fitness gyms will open on May the 18th. So we're maybe lagging a little bit behind the governor's approach with regard to indoor fitness and those kinds of things, but we feel like that's still appropriate given our facilities and our staff and making sure that we have all the protocols in place to keep folks safe. Can you go back just one more? I'm sorry. We do have a couple more things. Just wanted to mention to you things that we are considering for cancellation, and you'll see those in the bottom left of the chart. The Brazos Nights concert series and the 4th of July on the Brazos. Both of these are big and very successful festivals and that are offered here in Waco to our citizens. And really the challenge we have here is the contractual side of things and getting the events organized and getting folks, performers to come to the concert series and other things, and trying to get all those contracts in place in time for those events. Having not known what was going to happen, we're really challenged at this point to pull those off. So there's a couple of events that we would recommend cancellation this year. And then on the park and rec side of things, both our summer camps and our summer track, again, we've been, as we've looked at all around the state, folks are trying to understand what the protocols are going to be and then schedule appropriately. And we're at a point where those protocols are not firmly established for those types of events and mass gathering kind of events for us to really feel comfortable in keeping those on track. We recognize that that's going to be a challenge for some of our young folks here in town, not having those activities available to them. But the challenge for us is making sure the protocols are in place and then still getting the word out in time and hiring the appropriate staff and other things to pull those off. So those are 4 things that we've recommended that we're considering for cancellation at this point, and wanted to share all of our opening phases with you and get any comments that you might have on the items for possible cancellation. Any input the council may have, we certainly would welcome that now, or you could contact staff individually if you'd like.
Now let's pause now and get any questions or comments from council.
Hey, Paul, this is Hector. I just do have a few questions regarding this slide specifically.
Sure.
Cleaning city buildings and operations as we begin to open up our operations and our openings, what is the plan of attack for cleaning these facilities throughout the day?
We have increased cleaning of those frequently touched items such as doorknobs, door handles, countertops, those kinds of things. We're planning to do more and more of that. We've tried to distribute to our staff cleaning, Clorox wipes, those kinds of things, hand sanitizers. Those are all part of those preparation things, Councilmember, that I was talking about earlier. We're trying to get a lot of those things in place before we open, make sure that we have some good protocols in place, and we can certainly share those with you in some detail so that you can see those plans. We had a pretty detailed plan for the Hall of Fame that we put together, so we can share that information with you in detail if you like.
Okay, thank you. And then the bottom bullet point, it says that some facilities will still be closed to the public. What are some examples of those facilities that still would be closed?
Those are actually on the next slide, and I can get
Okay.
into those now if you'd like, or if there are other questions.
No, we can wait. I'm sorry.
Okay, sure, no problem. No problem.
The other only thing is, I'm in favor of this plan of attack. I think that this is great and very smart of city staff to put this together and to break it out in phases like this. So I want to commend you guys on that. The other only thing that I will add is if we decide to cancel our parks and rec summer camps, other things like that, I know we have quite a bit of families that usually take advantage of those summer camps. If we can maybe compile a list or maybe work with other organizations or community members that are going to be having summer camps that we can give to our parents, that in lieu of the city summer camps, here's some additional ones that you can take advantage of. That way we just can have that information readily available to our parents. But other than that, I think this plan of attack is very, very well thought out. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and that's a great suggestion. We'll reach out to some of our other community partners in regard to camps and try to coordinate as much as possible, and certainly information-wise, get that out. Great suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. Any other questions or comments?
My question was, I agree. I think this is a great approach, and I'm really thankful for all of the thought that went into this. My question would be, what are the triggers that we're monitoring to the extent that we start to see an uptick in cases, that we would consider closing some of the facilities that we own and therefore have control over whether they're open or not? Is that being considered at this time, or how are we approaching that?
We haven't set specific ranges, I guess you'd say, or specific mathematical, numerical levels of things, but we would certainly rely on the public health community as well as our business community, and that interaction that I think the mayor has started early on with a group of folks that are meeting on a weekly basis, even daily basis, and providing input to staff. And we certainly would rely on some of the council subcommittees as well to give us some guidance there as we go forward. We haven't set specific target levels for these yet, council member, but we'll continue to look at that. And if that's something the council would like us to prepare some sort of range or schedule or triggers, we can certainly look into doing that if you'd like.
My hope is that obviously we won't see an uptick in cases, and that this plan goes perfectly as planned. But to the extent that we do start to see an uptick in cases, I think it's good to be thinking through, okay, when do we edit this? How do we edit this to ensure that to the extent there is greater spread, we are doing our part with the facilities we do have direct control over to stop that. So I don't think it can hurt to put a little thought into what that could look like, just to make sure that we're ready. And again, I hope it doesn't happen. I'm just thinking we might want to be prepared for it. What does that backtracking look like? And again, I think, like you said, getting with the healthcare providers to say, hey, we're doing this, we're playing it open like this. What do we need to be looking out for if we need to roll that back? So just a thought.
Sure, we can certainly look at that. I know there's some work done prior to the governor's announcement, but some work had been done about gates and thresholds of gates, and then how to pass back through those gates. So we can take another look at that and perhaps use that as a guidance. It's good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll say I got to see go ahead. I'm sorry. I got to see just a little bit of the governor's press conference before we started this meeting, and he is looking at, one of the primary things he's looking at is positive tests over total tests taken on a given day for what he's calling a positivity rate. I think that would probably be a real key for us to be looking at. Then the other thing I want to mention is something that Deidre told me about yesterday, which is that Texas Department of State Health Services has not yet adopted the CDC's recommendation that we look at diagnosed cases a little bit differently to include those that were that physicians thought were probably positive but never were tested positive. So we may see an uptick in our numbers just as a result of that at some point. And that would not be enough. That would not really be a big cause for concern, because that would have just been something that has been going on all along, and it's just now being reported. So there are a lot of things like that in the numbers that we're going to have to be juggling and trying to interpret smartly as we go forward.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That's something that we will be looking at, and we'll get back to council with some recommendations and thoughts from staff on each one of those items.
Great. Thank you.
Paul, thank you for the presentation, and Deidre, you as well. I did have a question regarding the items considered for cancellation. Were those contracts already, were those like the concert series especially, and then the fireworks, the 4th of July, were they already under contract? And because I'm sure it's no longer with the phased, plan to reopen. Force majeure is not it's not something that it would be covered by any longer. Isn't that correct?
Mayor Pro Tem, I'm going to let ACM Ryan Holt respond to those. He's more familiar with those specific contract terms than I am.
Sure.
For both Brazos Nights and for 4th of July, none of those folks had been under contract yet.
Okay, good.
This sort of came to fruition right at the time when parks folks would have been reaching out to those performers. And as we've gotten further into this, the performers are as unsure as all of us are about whether or not it's the right thing to do and the timing, that's going to occur in July and through the summer and all that. And so there's so much uncertainty around it that, trying to nail down performers and frankly, the cost of some of that is so far up in the air that it's unfortunate that we're in that situation, but I think given all the circumstances, staff is leaning towards considering canceling those.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ryan, could I ask when you plan to make that final decision? I know several people are wondering about that, and I don't think you're getting a lot of pushback from council, even though we are all disappointed to have to do that. We've got to be sensible about the way we approach this.
Right. I think we agree. It's a decision that needs to be made sooner than later. We're trying to do everything we can do to read the tea leaves, so to speak. But it's one of those things that it looks like it'll be forthcoming very quickly. We wanted to get feedback, obviously, from the council. We're also seeing some of our other surrounding cities do the same thing. I was notified earlier today that Woodway was canceling their parade. And so I think it will be forthcoming very quickly now that we've received feedback from the council.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Are there any more questions on this information, Mayor? If not, we'll move on to the next slide. And with regard to specific city facilities, as was mentioned earlier, there are some city facilities that remain closed to the public. City Hall, the Dr. May Jackson Development Center, our Operations Center, as well as our libraries and our recreation community centers, and of course the Convention Center. We are continuing to look at some reopening strategies for each one of these facilities. Certainly we're going to adhere to any guidance that we have from CDC or the governor and look out for the safety of both our employees and citizens at each one of those facilities. Also, during the time of closure, it might give us an opportunity to look at how the facilities interact with the public, even looking at perhaps some security changes that we can make to protect both the public and employees as well. So we're looking at those things now and evaluating those. We have had pretty good luck with our alternative service delivery methods that we have, such as online, over the phone, electronic file sharing, email, those kinds of things that we've been able to interact with our customers and seem to have kept up with demands for service through some of those alternative methods. And so we don't feel too uncomfortable with continuing those, perhaps for as long as another month or so, and evaluating some of our facilities and looking at how we can improve those to protect both citizens and staff. So we'll be working through those over the next month and a half, and getting back with you and advising council along the way, and certainly welcome any input, direction that the council may have in that regard. And that is all I have. I'll be glad to answer any further questions that council may have.
Question? Paul, is there an update on when the municipal court will open?
I'll ask Deidre maybe to take that. I don't have that information.
Okay.
And Mayor, we may have to get back with you on that. I'm
Yeah,
getting a little.
yeah, Mayor, I think we need to check with the judge and identify what he thinks is best.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, council.
Thank you, Paul. It's a good report. and Deidre. Thank you both.
All right, Mayor, our next work session is 2022-71, which is discussion of the land use assumptions, capital improvements plan, and next steps of the impact fee study. Clint's joining us today. Our director, Clint Peters, our director of planning and inspections. He'll be covering where we are in the impact fee study, certainly. He'll also walk us through the next steps of that critical study. He's done a great job leading us through this important project, which really has its roots back in the comprehensive plan and started in earnest back in 2019. So look forward to Clint's report. This is actually a makeup from earlier in spring when we were impacted by COVID-19. So appreciate the council's patience for in waiting for this presentation. Clint?
Thank you, Bradley, and Mayor, City Council. It's good to see everybody today, this afternoon. The City Council approved the land use assumptions and CIP for the impact fees at the April 7th council meeting, and we did, as Bradley mentioned, we did have a presentation scheduled by our consultant, Freese and Nichols, to go over those on the March 17th meeting, which was canceled because of COVID-19. So we thought it would be important to give an overview of what they were going to present. Their presentation was more technical in nature, going over the land use assumptions and the CIP for the impact fee study. So I thought it would be better to do more of an overview, where we've been in the past to get to this point, kind of a 101 impact fee, go over the land use assumptions and CIP and the next steps. So as Bradley mentioned, this did start back with our comprehensive plan that the City Council adopted back in 2016. And I thought I'd read the specific recommendation out there because I think it does a pretty good job of explaining the recommendation of the reason why we're looking at these impact fees. It says that to consider the adoption of impact fees as a means of ensuring new development pays an equitable share of the costs associated with the construction and expansion of public infrastructure needed to service new development. Impact fees shift some of the costs of financing public facilities from the general taxpayer to direct beneficiaries of these facilities. Let me change the slide. Another way to look at this is who pays for the growth. And so we have two options, and one is our current way of doing things is no impact fees, and this puts the burden completely on the existing rate and taxpayers to build all capital facilities that are associated with new growth. This also creates a competition between maintenance programs like our pavement management program with capital improvements, and council's well aware of this and the difficulty of having to try to figure out how do we pay for maintenance of our existing roadways and infrastructure with the options of having to pay for new infrastructure to support the growth. With the impact fee structure, it helps offset or leverage some of that cost of new development and shares in part with that responsibility. So it shifts some of the burden onto the new development or the people that are needing that infrastructure. So a lot of cities are using this because it's a more fair system and equitable for our citizens. So what is an impact fee? These are controlled by Chapter 395, our Texas Local Government Code. They are a one-time charge imposed by the city against new development. They're assessed at the final plat and then charged at building permit. The fees are based on land use assumptions and expected population growth and corresponding capital improvements and expenditures necessary to support that growth. And we'll go over those land use assumptions and CIP. And then impact fees can only be used for increased capacity needed for new development for roadway, water, and wastewater infrastructure. And we are looking at all three of those. Cannot be used for maintenance of existing infrastructure. So what is eligible? We did talk about that it can only be used for new capacity project, not maintenance, but it can be used for recently constructed improvements with excess capacity to accommodate growth. And an example of that would be the Ritchie Road project that's under construction right now that's is being built to accommodate some existing growth that's happened in the past 5 years, but is also going to have excess capacity for future growth. So that can be eligible. Any future project that accommodate growth within the next 10 years, and that includes construction costs, right-of-way acquisition, engineering, surveying fees, also includes financing costs, and then the cost of the impact fee split between the three, water, wastewater, and roadway. Chapter 395 also has strict requirements on the process that you have to go through to create the fees. It is a three-phase process that is required to be led by a professional engineer. In this case, we've hired Friesen Nichols as our consulting firm that is leading us. It requires the development of a land use assumption and capital improvement plan, which we have completed and council has adopted. And then the phase that we are in currently is the impact fee calculations. And then the last fee portion is the impact fee ordinance adoption. And I'll go through those in our next step slide. It also requires the creation of a capital improvement advisory committee to help with recommendations and guide staff through this process. The capital improvements advisory committee was appointed by the city council. It's made up of plan commission members. Next slide. And then 4 representatives of our development community. That state law only requires 2, but we thought having 4 was a better representation of a cross-section of our development community. And those include Herb Cross, Scott Bland, Ken Cooper, and David Mercer, who are 4 prominent developers in our community. They have already conducted 3 meetings, and we'll have at least 1 more, maybe 2 more, as we get into calculations of the fees. And they did provide recommendations on the land use assumptions and capital improvement plan. The first part of that phase is the land use assumptions. This is a 10-year population employment growth projections for city limits in our ETJ. It's based on census data, our MPO and comprehensive plan growth projections, and building permit data. We have been heavily involved with our stakeholders in this process. We've had several meetings, including a meeting with the land use assumptions. This includes our development community, as well as we've had several neighborhood associations that have been interested in this study, so they've been included in that, and we're including the initial land use assumption meetings. So what did we come up with? Here's our numbers. We did look out 20 years, even though the impact fee just is for a 10-year period. What we came up with is about a 1.2% annual growth rate inside the city. That is up a little bit from what we had in our comprehensive plan. We had 1.07 in that, and I think that was when we started looking at the building permit data from the last 5 years. We have seen a little uptick in our growth rate. So I think everybody in the process was comfortable with that 1.2% growth rate for our population. You can see in our ETJ it is higher than that. That is part of that is there's just less population in the ETJ, but we are seeing a higher growth rate, almost 5% in the ETJ. The advisory committee did have several presentations and approve these growth rates back in July of 2019. And this is a map that just shows where that growth is occurring. I don't think this would be a surprise to anyone. The darker the color, the higher the rate of growth. This is a population. That darker burgundy color is 500 or more in population growth over the next 10 years. And you can see most of that is occurring on the edge of our city limits or in the ETJ in 84 corridor, down in West Waco, the Ritchie Road corridor, and then China Spring area.
Hey, it's not flipping forward. Yeah, okay. For some reason, my screen was not keeping up with the slides here. So I may have more questions at the end of this thing than necessary.
Okay.
Can you just brief this slide that I'm just now seeing the growth areas?
Yeah, so this shows our population growth by traffic impact zones, analysis zones. The darker the color is the higher rate of growth. That burgundy color is over 500 new people in those growth areas. And you can see the growth is occurring on the edge of our city limits in the Ritchie Road corridor, 84 corridor, and out in China Spring.
And then I'm sorry, I just didn't see. Flip back to the previous slide. Also, just give me a 10-second on that one too. Yeah, that one wasn't coming out for me. Can you explain what this one was again?
Sure. So this is a look at our projected growth in population and employment over the next 20 years to 2040. The impact fee only requires 10 years, but we do look out 20 years. And what you can see is a projected growth within the city limits of about 1.2%, which is about 600 new rooftops built in a year. And then you can see in our ETJ, it is higher. It's almost 5% increase. But that's because the population numbers are just lower in that area. So any growth out there has a higher percentage growth rate in it just because of the lower number in those areas.
Okay. Thanks. So that was the previous slide. Can you go to that one? Okay. For some reason, my screen was stuck on the slide before this one. So yeah. Okay. I think I'm caught up now. I've seen that one. Can you go to the next? Okay, go to the next one. Okay. What's the next one? All right. Here's where you were, right?
Yeah, so this is getting into our capital improvement plan for impact fees. Again, this is the needed infrastructure for that projected growth that we had in our land use assumptions. The consulting group used our comprehensive plan, master plans, our MPO thoroughfare plan, our city's capital improvement plans, area studies. These include a lot of our water and wastewater area studies. For example, our treatment plant studies for 84 in China Spring. And then we've had numerous meetings with city staff, public works, utilities, traffic department to come up with these capital improvement plan. Again, we also had 2 stakeholder meetings, one for the roadway CIP and one for the water and wastewater CIP. Back earlier in the year, December and January. And we have briefed some of our neighborhood associations with these. I think both the land use assumptions and the CIP, there is a broad agreement on these, this report on these growth rates and the CIP for both of these throughout our development community and our neighborhood association groups. So the study areas or service areas are a little bit different for water and wastewater and roadway, and these are based on state statute. The water and wastewater is all of our city limits and our ETJ, which is our CCN as well, our service CCN, where we're required to serve water and wastewater. So it's a larger area. And our roadway, which is on the right, is broken up into service areas. And I'll show a bigger slide of this. Go to the next slide. By state law, our roadway service areas can only be within our city limits. And they can only be in 6-mile diameter. And so we broke the city up into different areas, and you can see that on the map. There's 11 service areas for roadway in the city. Number one is the biggest, and that's a core of our city. Then you can see our growth areas are 9, 10, 11, and 7 is the China Spring. Where our water and wastewater, because it's a system that builds on each other, a new development in China Spring impacts not only that area, but also impacts the distribution lines and the treatment plants throughout the system. That it's considered one service area, where roadway, the impact is limited to that area. So if you have a lot of growth in China Spring, which would be service area 7, those impacts are really felt just in the China Spring area. So that's the reasoning by the different service areas. And so the fees collected in these service areas have to be spent for capital improvements for roadways in those service areas. So you cannot have fees collected in China Spring that are spent on new roadways in the Highway 84 corridor, for example.
Hey, Clint, how did we delineate these areas? What kind of went into, and is there a prescribed certain number we had to have, or just what was the criteria used to put the borders on these?
So a little bit of it is just geography, but some of it is, especially where you have major roadways, those were picked for borders, because if you have a major roadway, you can use fees from both zones that border that street for that street. And then some of it's strategic. So if you look at Zone 1, that's our core of the city, and there's not a lot of capacity projects needed in that area, because we have all the capacity, especially for roadway, in our core already here. A lot of our roadways are not operating anywhere close to what the capacity is on those. So there's potential where that fee for Zone 1, which is in the core, it could be 0, and that could be an incentive for developing in that core. And so that was some of the thinking behind creating those zones that way. And you can kind of see that when you start looking at the projects that are in the CIP, proposed CIP. And I'm not going to go through all of them individually because there's a bunch of them, but I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of where they are. You can see in Zone 1, there's only one little portion of one project, which is Golson Road in Zone 1. So through the study, what we've determined is that our roadway capacity in Zone 1 is adequate for the foreseeable future with growth. So in this scenario, the impact fee for roadways would be really low or almost 0, or could be 0 for Zone 1. Where you're seeing a lot of the needed infrastructure, again, is in those growth areas. So Zone 7 out in China Spring, Zone 11 is 84, Zone 9 and 10 is the industrial district, West Waco and the Ritchie Road corridor. There's a lot of needed infrastructure in those zones. So you can see that kind of follows our land use assumptions of where growth is happening. Is also where we need roadway improvements. Moving on to the water and wastewater CIP. The first one is water. This map is kind of hard to read, but one of the things I wanted to point out on this, again, it kind of explains the difference between the water and wastewater and the roadway is a lot of the CIPs are spread out. They're distributed evenly throughout the city. Again, because, as you look at growth areas, the growth, you need to distribute those utilities, whether it be water or wastewater, through the system all the way to where it's being, where the treatment is occurring, whether it be water or wastewater. So it has more impact over the whole system. And we are seeing a lot of redevelopment in our inner city, where it's going from a lower intensity use to residential to more intense use, commercial or mixed use, and it is needing more capacity for those utilities in our core. Go to the next slide. And this is just a list of the projects. I'm not going to go through all of them individually. That top list, the A through L, those are all either existing or under construction projects that are adding capacity. And then the bottom portion of the list is 1 through 13 is new projects that are planned for the next 10 years. So you can capture capacity projects that have already been built. For example, the Owens Lane elevated storage tank added capacity in that tank, so it's not only serving existing customers, it's serving future customers as growth happens. So we are able to capture some of those costs with impact fees. And again, same with the wastewater. I would like to point out two big projects that we've talked about is treatment plants for the 84 corridor area in China Spring, included in this CIP list. You can go to the next slide. And you can see those on the list as well. So next steps. The Friesen Nichols has already started work with their sub-consultants, NewGen Consultants, and then Walker Partners in impact fee calculations. They started that work in April and will continue it to June. This process will be coming up with costs for all that needed infrastructure, estimated costs, and then going through in calculating what the maximum fee can be by state law, based on the number of service units projected by our land use assumptions and growth rates. And so they're working on that, and they'll start having reports back to us in hopefully early June. Then we can start having discussions about what those fees should be, policy decisions, with our stakeholder groups, the advisory committee and city council. We're anticipating that will take a couple of months to go through that process. And then we'll have the public hearings on impact fee ordinance, which are required by law in August and in September, with the goal of having these in place by October 1st, which was the original schedule when we started this project. One thing, obviously with the COVID-19 impact on the economy and development, that will be a main point of discussion as we go through these next couple of months with the stakeholder meetings and the discussions with the advisory committee and council about what's appropriate during this time. I think, what staff has been talking about, this is an important tool for the long-term future of being able to serve growth. And, we do think it's important to at least get a framework in place for impact fees, and, depending and seeing how we end up with what the fees are, is going to, be dictated by the economy and what we feel like can be absorbed by the market. So we do feel like this is important enough to keep moving forward and having those discussions as we start getting the calculation numbers back from the consultants. And with that, I'd entertain any questions or comments you'll have.
This is Holmes. Clint, thanks for the presentation. I know this is a big project for Waco. We've been talking about it for quite a while, and we finally got this thing kind of tracked. I know that capacity infrastructure are important, particularly as we're growing. District 5, and there's a lot of that going on over in the western part of the China Spring and the West Highway 84 neighborhoods. I think we're taking a thoughtful approach here, and it's tough to strike a fair balance, between the developers and the city taxpayers, frankly, and trying to figure out a fair system here. I think is important, and I appreciate that we're taking the time to figure out the best way to do it. I think it was very important, and you covered this in your comments, but the fact that we had 4 developers on that task force as we went through with the plan commission folks and getting their feedback on the front end I think is very important as we implement and try to figure out the right method here. Again, when you're talking about, this has come up in council the last 6-8 months. When you're talking about a water treatment plant in China Spring that could cost 30 million, north of 30 million, the same in West Highway 84. They're needed out there because the population areas require it. But to figure out an impact fee to maybe defray those costs a little bit, I think is an important part of putting a budget together, frankly, at the city level. We want to continue to see the quality development out there. We don't want to scare developers off either, because I mean, that's what you hear, you know, if you put the impact fees in place, we're going to go somewhere else. But I think, and again, as we come up with these numbers in the fee calculation, the next steps, I think it's important to know that we don't want to stifle growth, but at the same time, I'm a proponent that we do need a framework here to plug in a variable number. Maybe it's so much per lot and a nominal amount on this front end, just so we understand that we need help in our city budget to defray some of these costs for infrastructure on the outer parts of the city. So I'm looking forward to the next steps as we talk about fee calculations and how we put that rubric together and get the input again from the community on what makes sense. But again, thanks, Clint, for doing this. I know this it's gotten kind of held up due to this COVID thing, but I appreciate your work and your team's work on keeping the same track. Thanks, Clint.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Yes, sir. Hey, Clint, this is Hector. Thank you so much for the presentation as well. I think it's very well thought out, and so I appreciate this is actually coming to fruition. You know, I know that this has been on council's agenda even before I came on council, and I'm glad to see that it's coming forth and that you are still moving forward. And I completely agree with the implementation of impact fees in our community. One thing that I just want to make sure of as we begin to create this public policy, and I know that'll fall a lot on council, is that, you know, while I'm very grateful for the development that's going on, even in the outer areas, I want to make sure that we're encouraging development in the core of our city as well. And so I don't know what that would look like as far as impact fees. You know, will they be different for those that are building within the core of the city rather than those that are outside? And so I don't know what that looks like. I don't even know what that answer is, but I know you guys are thinking about this already, and I'll be glad to see what you come up with. But also, as you know, Councilmember Holmes mentioned this a little bit earlier, you know, as we've all been impacted by COVID-19, and that includes developers, you know, I want to make sure that we are still cultivating and encouraging development in our city and in our community. So if that looks like the first year, the impact fees might not be as high as anticipated, then so be it. And they're on what I would consider the step ladder that year after year they're revisited, or, you know, until we are recovering from this crisis. And so I just want to make sure that we are still encouraging the development that's going on in our city, fully acknowledging and aware of the current economic climate that we're in. And so I know these are things that you are already thinking about. And of course, the Plan Commission, along with the 4 developers or builders that are on this committee. And so I just am very excited to see that it's coming to fruition. So those are just a few things that I just want to make sure that we're thinking about as we move forward in this process. But overall, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. Any other questions or comments? Looks like everybody's still muted. All right. Well, Clint, I really appreciate all the work that you and the Plan Commission and others have done on this. This really is an important thing to establish equitable funding sources for these new developments. And as everyone here has said, we don't want to do anything to discourage development, but we just got to find the right balance to allocate the costs that go with that amongst the new development versus the core of the city. And you've done a lot of great work to get us to this point, and I look forward to implementation. And if it's a phased implementation, I think that's something we should consider. But just, you know, also remember that as we phase it, we're still not we're not dealing with it equitably until we get it fully implemented. So It may be necessary because of the time that we're in, but I'd like to see us get to the end product as quickly as we can.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, Clint. That's all the work session items we have. Are there any council requests for scheduling the future agenda items? Okay. We will plan to reconvene here at 6 p.m. for our business session. And council, remember, we'll need to exit this meeting, and let's try to start our next meeting by 4:40, our executive session. And we will now recess the work session and reconvene regular session for executive session as read into the record by the city secretary at 4:34 p.m.
Notice is hereby given that the City Council will go into executive session in accordance with the following provisions. 1, Real Property, Texas Open Meetings Act, Section 551.072. 2, Economic Development, Texas Open Meetings Act, Section 551.087. And 3, Personnel, Texas Open Meetings Act, Section 551.074. Municipal Judge Christopher Taylor. We are now in executive session at 4:35 p.m.